only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
WESN.
I often speak about the implication of individuals younger than me passing away from unnatural circumstances and how it feels somewhat surreal, because I will never forget the change in my perception when I was younger and watching movies or reading stories about war or hearing about crimes. It was always, well, that's adult stuff, you know? But now it's the case of individuals not having the same amount of life and experience and chances to just see and do things. But then there's that mid-ground point where it hits slightly different. One of the recent murders within the last few days, based on piecing together things from social media, someone who I knew 20 years ago, when we were both significantly younger, was one of the shooting victims. This one with the Cookery shooting on, I think it was Thursday. Yeah. Seeing it on social media, some of our mutual friends commenting on it, sending the word, on to other mutual friends, and it's kind of strange because I can't say, oh, look how less fortunate he was than me, or he was old, so at least he had a reasonable chance at life. 41. As far as I knew him, wasn't the type to be involved in anything. I can't say anything more now, but, given the social circles we run in and the fact that it wasn't as though he was removed from those circles, I think it's safe for me to assume still isn't someone who would easily be involved in anything that would lead to something like this. And then you take that consideration now and you're just left with the realization of it's hard to say that I feel safe or that I think it's safe for any and everyone else. Now, maybe there's the cynical approach would say, well, you know, crime, particularly violent crime, affects men more and so on and so on. But we had a period where it was affecting young ladies, it was affecting the elderly, it was affecting children. But of course, on top of that, there's a very human reaction that, you know, despite the fact that I haven't seen him in a long time, I haven't spoken to him in a long time, depending on your point of view, you could say we were more acquaintances than friends, but still, he was a peer in a social circle that I was a part of more extensively for quite some time, and still am to some degree. It's just not one of the things that you want to hear to say, well, things are looking better, right? The murder rate is down. But now we have to be concerned about individuals who are not members of gangs, who are not involved in anything. Well, we don't know what the motive is for the shooting. You know, so there's a lot of questions. I can't necessarily say everything that I've said is with a degree of absolute certainty. But it's a lot easier when murders happen to other people. And we do a good job as a country, as a nation, as a society, as a culture, to ignore it. Because I myself, I kind of keep one eye on crime stories, but I don't try and focus on it because it'll be too depressing, to be honest. And I did that for a while, so I know firsthand. It's not that it'll be too depressing. What's depressing is you'll start to get numb to it. And then when you start to realize, hey, what's another murder? Emotionally, academically, you understand what it means. It just doesn't hit the same way because you've just gotten numb to it. And I don't really want to kind of be like that. It's a weird place to be. It's not like we're in a war zone, right? Supposed to be in a zone of peace, right? It's not like we're in a war zone now where this is supposed to be the norm. But this is not technically the first murder in very recent times that have hit within my social circle, which is not any kind of questionable social involved in anything that could lead to something circle. It's very mundane. That's the issue. That's the scary implication. We're not even talking about a circle of a whole set of rich, sleazy businessmen who are going to have a lot of enemies that want to have reprisals on them. We're talking ordinary citizens throughout the spectrum of middle class, maybe even lower middle class, maybe even under middle class. Definitely not upper class. And people are being picked off from there, not involved in anything to make enemies, as far as I'm aware, not involved in anything suspicious, and yet can still be made a victim. And again, potentially not involved in a robbery gone wrong situation. So I don't know what it is, and maybe there's stuff that I'm missing, and maybe I'll never know, and maybe I'll be happy to never know. But the implication on our society, we just had a member of the government whose relative was murdered, right? At what point are we going to have to wait for enough people? It doesn't have to be a family member. It just can be someone you know. Someone you know who, as best that you know about them, the most that you know about them is that they've done nothing to deserve anything close to this. You see, I guess if it's a case where as a people we were taking it a lot more seriously, but maybe seriously is not the most accurate word, urgently, then I'll be willing to dive headfirst back into that as well. but I question if we are. Everything that I have seen has led me to believe that most people just want someone to solve the problem, but they don't actually want to have to do anything to help solve the problem. Which, you juxtapose that with the stand your ground stuff, it's very, very interesting. I wonder what will actually happen, because there, of course, it's always a vocal minority. You will never get the majority speaking out, which the problem is not that you'll never get the majority. The problem is, in my opinion, you have too small of a minority speaking out on issues in TNT. Too much of the majority isn't speaking. But generally speaking, with things like feedback, with things like voicing opinions, in most cases, it'll be a vocal minority. So we know that there's a vocal minority that wants firearms and stand your ground laws. We don't necessarily know for sure how much of the population that is, and if the majority of the population wants it. Here's the thing though, we will get an indicator if and when it comes to pass, because then we will see how the population responds with these new facilities, the facilitation of potentially having a firearm and more specific laws to help defend oneself, at least in certain situations. How many people will opt into that? The Prime Minister admitted, if you don't like it, you don't have to take it. Because the one thing about the stand your ground legislation that I actually wouldn't mind seeing is if individuals would be proactive at the very least of their own safety. Because as members of a democracy, I would argue we're nowhere near proactive enough. And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself with these murders, and listen, it won't feel the same if you don't know anybody directly. Not just, well, I know so-and-so because I've seen him. But even then, I remember years ago, I was in Tobago, I bought a gyro. 2 weeks later, the guy I bought the gyro from was murdered. You don't know about over what. And that bothered me a little bit even. But for those like myself who know of people, not just, the face, the name, but you've had conversations, you've gotten to know them, at least part of their personality with regards to whatever reason you all interacted. And as near as you could figure, there is no specific reason why they were the victim of violent crime. You then basically have to ask yourself, at what point are people dying that could have been prevented if we just had a handle on the murder rate? And a lot of this is just excessive and unnecessary, because at least with gangsters killing gangsters, you could understand. You don't condone it. It's not an acceptable situation, but it's logical, right? But now these murders are starting to become more and more illogical. And the problem with that is then that opens the floodgates for an exponential increase. Granted, yes, the murder rate is supposed to be down. What's going to happen when the state of emergency ends? Are we going to be living under state of emergency in perpetuity? I don't know how that's supposed to work. Meanwhile, of course, state of emergency, right? Technically, this whole wave of states of emergency, we had a small gap in between, but one could argue this whole situation where crime is being suppressed, you could say artificially, because it requires states of emergencies, was at the end of December. We're approaching December again. We would be under state of emergency for most of a year. Now, there's Operative Festive Shield, fancy names, with regards to dealing with crime prevention plans for Christmas and Carnival. One of the headlines has a merchants in San Juan being skeptical with regards to the current situation. And again, murder rate is down, crime is supposed to be down, but at least one community of business owners, they don't expect the increased visibility alone to curb the current crime surge. And who can blame them? Increased visibility did nothing for school violence. You have attempted crimes in front of police stations. One of the things there's some funny stories in the papers with regards to what have police been up to. Now, in one case, and this might be why we have a hard time being confident in just, oh, more police, better. There's a situation. Now, this is a story that shows both good and bad with regards to the TTPS. A police officer was in a casino. I'll just give the short version. And essentially, the manager had a security guard kick him off the premises. Now, the police officer, I believe, complained that one of the estate constables assaulted him by grabbing his hand and pushing him onto a game machine and then out of the establishment. Now, that could be the literal explanation, but doesn't necessarily, and this might not matter, but doesn't necessarily mean that the intention was to push him onto a game machine. It could have just been to push him out of the establishment. Thing is, the police officer called in for backup, and the backup just basically told him, well, we can't arrest the security guard. So, on the one hand, it seems as though, because we don't necessarily have the story as to why he was forcibly removed from the premises. But generally speaking, I think this is one of those things where customers have to be wary that depending on our behaviors in other people's private establishments, management of said establishments reserve the right to refuse admission. A lot of places have signs like this, and that includes, if deemed necessary, utilizing security guards to escort you out. And if you don't want to leave on your own 2 feet, by your own power, to force you out by whatever reasonable means can be determined based on the scenario. And it seems as though the police officers from the Guard and Emergency Branch, they said based on the circumstances, they had no reason to arrest the security guard. So that preliminary assessment says maybe there might be video camera footage that will change the determination, but it says that security guard was well within his right to force you out in the manner that he did. And now you have to question with regards to this police officer, what did he do? And the other thing is, it seems as though he feels that because he is a police officer, he is entitled to things and doesn't understand you don't have the powers vested in you as the patron of a casino. Because it didn't say he went in there to conduct inquiries on official police business. Right? And this is supposed to be a senior police officer. According to a police report, the senior officer was behaving in an aggressive manner and requested that the security guard be immediately arrested. As though, how dare this security job treat me like this? Does he not know who I am? I'm a senior police officer. I could do no wrong. My doo-doo don't smell, unlike the rest of you peasants, right? I am a special snowflake that deserves special consideration. And to the credit of the other police officers, they were like, that's not how this goes. We're not about that life right now. So credit to the security guard and management because he probably said, I'm a police officer, don't touch me, don't do this, whatever, and didn't want to leave. This is my assumption. You kind of have to make it obvious that you are refusing management's refusal of your admission in the establishment, and you're not willing to leave when they request you to leave, for them to put their hands on you. And it was done in a manner that I was fine with the police. So I'm like, this kind of thing is part of the reason why people have trust and confidence issues in the police service. It helps a lot that the responding police officers nip that in the bud right away. Of course, now you have to ask, is it a guard and emergency branch thing? Better training, more professional? I don't know. See, we have comments already. We'll take the comment later in the next story. Then there's a situation where a police officer, he left things like his bulletproof vest and his badge, I believe his badge or his ID, police ID badge, and his bulletproof vest in a vehicle while he was liming. Vehicle was stolen, and of course his ID badge and his bulletproof vest was taken. This is slightly a big deal. It's just one of those things where I don't know if he expected, because I'm a police officer, is fine. But ironically, in the report, there's also a story about a man who left his car running and exited his car to go get a hubcap that fell off his car. Someone jumped in the car and sped off. And I do wonder if we are far too complacent with things like motor vehicles. I know people who I'm close to who do things like that. And I just like, you're crazy. Y'all are just crazy. Y'all are nuts. I don't understand it. I don't know if the police officer necessarily did anything as reckless as that, because he left the car for about approximately 5.5 hours. But the whole sense of, I don't necessarily know to what extent is this an issue of him not being responsible with important, police paraphernalia like a bulletproof vest and his ID badge. But I do wonder if there was anything he could have done better in the situation. But again, if they're going to steal a policeman's car, crime is down, right? State of emergency. It's a state of emergency. And police officers are victims of crime. And now, at least part of the business community is saying, we'll believe it when we see it. And the sad part is we're technically supposedly seeing it now. And yet, do we feel safer? Going back to the first topic that I spoke about. Do we feel safer? Because with regards to physical safety from random acts of murder, I don't. I have never felt this unsafe to be in my yard coming home, whether night or even day. Now, one of the things that's been disappointing is for the whole year, information on crime statistics has not been published on the TTPS website. And for the previous years, throughout the history of Talking Point, when murder started to go out of control, one of the areas to get an official statistic, one could argue or debate whether or not it was accurate or not, would be the TTPS website. But that would be a couple months behind, which is fine. I'm all right with that if it's just a couple months behind. But all of this year, no mass, nothing, right? Because by about March, April, curiosity is like, okay, what's the actual official statistics? And the thing is, it's not like the police were downplaying the murders or undercounting them, right? It was what it was. Now, the Minister of Homeland Security is giving an explanation. There were some issues. Doesn't necessarily say what the issues were, right? They're currently reviewing the process for publishing the data. Once verification and approval are granted, the process is completed, information is made publicly available on the website. I do wonder if all of the upheaval with the police executive, state of emergency, into the arrest of the commissioner, into the appointment of an acting commissioner, into then the appointment of a substantive commissioner, into then whatever's going on with the executive after he leapfrogged all of the DCPs and ACPs to become the substantive commissioner. I don't know if that had something to do with it. Generally speaking, you could see where leadership's lack of sign-off / interference could have led to this, which again undermines transparency issues, because the thing is, for people who are more knowledgeable about where they could find information and are more up to date with regards to the various topics and issues and news stories and current events, the people who are more well read, those are the ones who are looking for TTPS statistics, including the media. And at the end of the day, the last thing you want is to make yourself look suspicious with regards to people like that. One would hope you would try to at least get them on your side, because these are the ones who potentially you could sway with logical arguments, with factual arguments, and you won't have to rely on emotional arguments, slogans, catchphrases, buzzwords, etc., etc. Because emotional stuff could backfire on you spectacularly. But logical stuff, once you are truthful and you're willing to deal with the consequences of whatever the truth is, that's going to be stable. As long as the information is accurate and you're truthful, people who are looking to assess the merits of a situation, as opposed to taking an emotional arguments, their assessment is going to be relatively stable, based, of course, on the data. And then you will potentially have businesses depend on word of mouth. Trust and confidence, perception depends on word of mouth too. Just as much as businesses can depend on word of mouth. Doesn't mean that they don't do marketing, advertising, public relations, and the like. Same thing for the TTPS. And part of the word of mouth in this case, you know, or maybe not word of mouth per se, but an extension of that, or something, information industry that utilizes some of these channels for information distribution and reception, is the media. Doesn't help if the media now has to ask questions, what's going on with police reporting and statistics? And why did it take almost a year? They can't say what the issues are. I wonder why. And there's no it's not necessarily said that the issues are solved or resolved. If you can't deal with, think about it now. One of the most complex things, the most complex professional responsibilities, is trying to investigate major crimes, investigate, collect evidence, not get anybody killed, and then pass on enough evidence, enough good evidence for a successful prosecution. That's a complex operation. You know what's not as complex as that? Publishing data on our website. It's nowhere near as sensitive as ongoing investigations. It's nowhere near as complex as conducting police investigations. It's nowhere near as long as police investigations for major crimes, at least. And it's nowhere near as uncertain as police investigations, where you might run into dead ends. It might be, you know, you just might not get, you might lose the trail, you might not get enough clues, you might not get enough intelligence. Publishing data, you have the data, you publish it. You don't have the data, you don't publish it. And then, if it's a case where you have incomplete data, one of the easiest things to do, because this is not like it's a final exam and you're trying to get the work done, you don't want to admit that you didn't study. No, just professional now. If you have a reasonable explanation as to why your data is incomplete, then go to the public and say, well, for the month of so, data is incomplete. But one would think, you take the police reports, it shouldn't be that hard. It's not like we have 10,000 murders a month and, you know, assessing what to publish is difficult. As much as the murder rate is high. Data entry 101 If you can't handle that, dare I say, it is reasonable for people to look at Christmas and Carnival and be skeptical about the police, what is it, Operation Festive Shield. I remember when the American military had Operation Anaconda, we copied that. Yeah, we Operation Anaconda. I can't even remember how successful or not it was because I found it kind of ridiculous. You copied and paste a name just for marketing. Operation Festive Shield, that's nice. Is the go, no go, ho, ho, ho? I don't know. Is the National Operations Center codenamed the North Pole? Like, I get it, it's cute, but publishing a cute operation name does not make me feel better about the situation. Perception is a hell of a thing. Perception is a hell of a drug. Let's take a break. When we come back, we already got a comment on it. I didn't even speak about it yet. We got a comment on US with this one thing, so we'll head to that next. Stay tuned. We'll be back up.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fanzone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
My name is Dr. Joanne Williams Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being. Give us a call.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
So there's been a lot of controversy with what is now known that TNT and the United States are going to have joint military exercises. I believe the expectation is that it will be with the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. That is the Marine land component of the ARG, right? Approximately a battalion plus transports and helicopters. Usually it might include some attack helicopters, although I don't know what will necessarily be involved in the exercise. Back when they conducted some joint training, when the Gravely, the U.S. destroyer, was here, U.S. Marines were transported via V-22 Ospreys, new tilt rotorcraft, good range, etc., etc. So I don't know if, we know that with U.S. Army, or I'm not sure if it was Seahawks or Blackhawks, but our defense forces trained with the U.S. military, with U.S. helicopters, and the expectation is with these exercises, there will be joint training with regards to urban and rural environments. And there's a lot of controversies coming about this exercise for two reasons, but really one. It all comes back down to the timing. With regards to the tensions with the United States and Venezuela, and the tensions, of course, with Venezuela and Trinidad, but with the U.S.-Venezuelan tensions and the fact that a supercarrier, which is a big difference compared to an amphibious assault ship or amphibious assault carrier, and it's not just any supercarrier, because if it was a British or Chinese or Russian carrier or Spanish, no. A U.S. supercarrier plus other assets on Puerto Rico and a build-up in Puerto Rico, and the interesting ways how the Americans are phrasing it, to say that there's zero chance of any attempted military intercession in Venezuela would not be reasonable. Let's put it that way, right? It's not guaranteed that there's regime change, but hey, it's not guaranteed that it will rain any day. But we do know that, generally speaking, it will rain on some days. And we do know that they're putting things in place to do something. So with that, there's the whole situation with regards to this new joint exercises, which has a lot of criticisms about it. Now, first of course, the Minister of Defense, he is pointing out something that's actually quite pertinent. And this goes back to when he Gravely visited. There are some basic things that you do as a military, and we do have a military, and if you don't do them, you're kind of being irresponsible with your military. And that is to train with other militaries so that you could share experiences. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Our military probably doesn't have that much to offer the Americans. We haven't engaged in anything outside of disaster response in the region, and maybe we are accustomed to certain things with regards to long-range foot patrols in the kind of Caribbean tropical environment. To what extent is that pertinent? I don't know. Whereas American infantry, now these men, a lot of them probably might not have combat experience, but they will maybe be led by individuals with combat experience, number one. And number two, their institution, the U.S. Marine Corps, would have, at least in the previous decade, some amount of combat experience that would have helped inform their training and their procedures, etc., etc. And that sort of institutional experience we don't have. So to train with a foreign military that has it is beneficial. The question you have to ask is, what is the merit of the TNT Defense Force? What is the purpose of having the TNT Defense Force? And in this case, because when the Gravely visited, that was to do joint training with regards to maritime military operations, right? They wanted our Coast Guard and our Coast Guard officers and personnel to get some cross-training with a much more experienced and larger maritime power than ours. Cool. Now that ground troops are coming in, it's mainly going to be the regiment, right? Maybe the Air Guard as well. And it leaves the question, if we had a purpose for these arms of services that required their continuing existence, yes, the training will be valuable, right? What's the point of having the regiment? Basically, our scaled down version of our army to defend ourselves from any sort of external threat that might threaten us by coming on our shores. We don't have land borders to protect, but if they come up on our beaches or come by air and invade our territory, we have at the very least a token defense to say that we're not completely defenseless, right? A regiment isn't a lot of troops. Essentially, it's 3 times the amount of troops on that one American ship there in the middle. That one American ship, well, generally, those 3 ships, we have over 3 times as much as infantry, not personnel, infantry. Well, 1 battalion is a support battalion. I don't know, I would assume they would also be trained as general infantry. But if you think our defense force, particularly, because with the Coast Guard, you can at least see the mission, protect the maritime borders, right? That is a mission that is in times of war, in times of peace, in terms of a foreign state or a criminal enterprise. That's a mission that's always going to be there. With regards to the defense force, the regiment and the air guard, what is there? What are we asking them to do? The air guard could get training too. Marines are quite experienced in helicopter operations. One would assume our air guard will be based more on helicopters and planes. But also, the American Navy has some experience with small planes and the specific challenges and logistics with regards to that. Are we going to benefit from this training in a practical way, or is it what detractors think it is, right? What's interesting is that the Minister of Homeland Security, there's a report that said he was unaware about the U.S. Operations Southern Spare. My thing is, why am I going to be surprised that the Minister of our Homeland Security has not necessarily been briefed on U.S. Southern Spare? Like, it's not as though he needs to know to prepare in advance. Yes, there's the case of Venezuela could become destabilized, you know, if they attack Venezuela tomorrow. But, I mean, one could argue defense force are the people that need to know what's going on. Here's the thing. With the exercise, apparently, there's been a report that the defense force is not aware about the exercise. Let me see if I could find the specific report here. This is one report. Defense force uninformed as U.S. Marines arrive. That is the headline. Joint training exercises were set to begin today, or I believe yesterday. Several government ministers and senior military officers remain tight-lipped about the details of the operation. However, multiple defense force sources told Guardian Media that even senior officers had not been briefed on the exercises or their scope, which, if you want to make the most of an exercise, you can't have the Americans land today and then, all right, this is what we want to do, this is what we hope to do, this is what we plan to do. So now we're going to brief you on the plan, and you're going to have to play catch up while we just sit around and scratch and wait on you. Because, you know, we're a visiting foreign military who is technically deployed to do some operations Southern Spare, and y'all ain't ready because your bosses didn't tell you what's going on. Like, now part of this could be potentially, our government is just not necessarily experienced to handle situations like this. But let's go to the actual criticisms now. First, of course, the Venezuelan president, he has criticized the whole situation. How to put this? And what I hate about this is I could see where people are going to view this and say if this makes sense. It doesn't make quite that same direct sense to me. TNT U.S. military drills threaten Caribbean peace. You see, the thing is, because this is what Maduro said. They say they're going to do it from Monday to Thursday. Well, the people of Trinidad and Tobago will see if they continue to tolerate the use of their waters and land to seriously threaten the peace of the Caribbean. calling the military exercise irresponsible. Now, again, here's another quote. Out with the imperialist ships, out with military threats. Venezuela demands respect. The people have considerable power in the streets in every city. They want to steal our oil. Are we going to let them? They want to steal our gas. Are we going to let them? Notice in all of these quotes, there is nothing that actually says how the exercises threaten Caribbean peace. Now, I'm not saying that the United States presence is not a threat to Venezuela. What I am pointing out is the communication style by politicians. This thing, which is tied to a wider situation, we're going to say that it threatens Caribbean peace. We're not going to describe any sort of process how that might come to pass. We're not going to logically explain why we could say that. We're going to let you assume that whatever your assumption is on why we say it, that's the reason why. You fill in the blanks. We're not going to fill in blanks. That way, if at any point in time there's any sort of contradicting factor that comes to light, we're not exposed to that. You have to resolve it. And then we're going to say they're threatening us militarily, imperialist ship. We demand respect. Now, the thing is, one could argue Venezuela wants respect for another issue. What does that have to do directly with the exercises? It hasn't been explained. Technically speaking, these things are not exactly the same, unless Maduro is saying, well, it is disrespectful for you to have training exercises with TNT because why? Are you saying we are a threat to Trinidad and Tobago? Now, the opposition, our opposition has also questioned this situation. Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez, he said that while the exercise formed part of a tradition of cooperation between the U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago in law enforcement, although technically, now here's the question. We're in a weird spot where we kind of associate military and law enforcement too much. I would argue for the Americans, it's very different. So, but, and this is where it gets really complicated, because the Americans themselves, it was highlighted by one Express columnist, the words of General Paula J. Richardson, who was the commander of U.S. Southern Command, I believe, right? A 4-star Army general, 101st officer. Now, the thing is, one of the things, because I don't necessarily agree fully with Mrs. Mirage's premise, although the basic ideas that she has, I can't disagree with. Some of the specifics I don't. But one of the things trying to find the source material is that this general was speaking about transnational crime as an issue and a threat strategically for the United States and to the region that U.S. Southern Command was looking at in 2023. And we also have like a lot of internal research and literature with regards to transnational crime in 2024 and before. So it's not as though we're getting all of a sudden published reports in 2025 to justify what's going on in 2025. So back to what I'll try and just make this point because I just mentioned Marvin Gonzalez. They should be considered against the backdrop of military tension in the region. Here's the catch-22. It comes back, this is not the end, we have Digger Martin in line, but I'll just say this quick. There's military tension in the region, that's cool. Part of that tension is threats against Guyana. We are also a direct neighbor. We are also very small and rely on a foreign partner to defend us. This is basically one of maybe 2 foreign partners that we could call on. And this is the foreign partner that has the ability, the United States, to project a response faster and a larger response than our traditional close ties to the United Kingdom. So at a time of military tensions, one could argue, is this an escalation? Maybe, but also, is this an attempt to prepare us for worst case scenarios that we haven't even thought of yet? And would it be responsible to not do it? I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it's something that should be discussed. We'll continue that. We'll take Digger Martin. Good morning, Collie, on here.
Good morning, Sean, and to all your listeners. Now, we looking at a lot of what you said from the eyes of Maduro, through the lens of Maduro, with respect to saying we no longer, or we could basically disrupt a zone of peace. But yesterday, I was fortunate to listen attentively to Karen on a YouTube channel. And what she basically said is that everybody in CARICOM knows Venezuela is a transshipment point for cocaine.
Yeah.
They don't basically grow it, process it. It comes from Colombia, and it comes through Venezuela. It comes from Peru. That is why you see on the Pacific Ocean, they're blowing up boats, and then on the Atlantic side and Caribbean Sea, they're blowing up boats. So Trump has basically coordinator of put guardrails on it. And what Karen was saying, CARICOM, and this is my take on it, CARICOM knows this for the longest while, and I am putting my 2 pieces into it. Why haven't CARICOM leaders gone to Maduro and say you are causing mayhem in our country using it? I mean to say, yes, he's basically, I see he's going to pray now, and he wants to talk, but he basically contributing to 625 murders in Trinidad. We know the guns coming in from South America. We know they're using the goatee crab to go up all of the islands because there are several areas. So CARICOM leaders have been complicit. And Karen said that. She said that. The other alarming thing she said, and she's questioning now, what was the agenda of the Keith Christopher PNM regime that they continue to pontificate on the dragon gas? She said, after listening to the current Prime Minister, she has to agree with the current Prime Minister. We don't need dragon gas. We have, she said, she did all the work, all the investigation, and we have enough gas in our waters to move this country forward. And she further asked loudly what was the true agenda of pushing the dragon gas. And she has also said, were they using the dragon gas to facilitate all those Venezuelans? Because he said per capita Trinidad has most Venezuelans for population size than any part of the world, and they are putting a lot of strain on our social infrastructure. They're clamoring up our medical facilities, and it was an excellent. I don't know if she ever highlighted that, but I'll wait for her later on in the week because I saw it just by chance on a YouTube.
Yeah.
I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, Colin. I'm not sure how old that is. Based on the subject matter, it sounds like it's relatively recent. Is the rest of CARICOM complicit? I'll say this. I wouldn't necessarily want to say that because I think the problem grew incrementally. And one of the issues could be, at least with regards to the technocrats on the situation in the United States military, right? Forget the political side with Trump and Hegseth and Rubio. With regards to U.S. Southern Command and the institution of U.S. Southern Command, they were probably looking at a situation in Venezuela where we worry if it destabilizes. But the key point is it's not necessarily very stable now. It's more accurate to say if it destabilizes further. But right now, potentially, I do think there's intelligence that the authorities, including our authorities, might have intelligence to already either suggest this or to outright prove it. Venezuela, it has enough of a vacuum where it's easy for transnational criminal organizations to operate. And my fear would be that, and I think this might have been the fear for U.S. Southern Command, the situation could have gotten out of control. The thing is, drug dealing and terrorism have gone hand in hand in other parts of the world. Let's not forget that. So, and now it all depends on how you define terrorism, and do criminal activity to intimidate people like prosecutors and judges and politicians and elected officials constitute terrorism. It's something that, again, I don't think a court has ruled on, so there's no precedent on. I could see the logic for it, but I'm not a lawyer, one. And two, just because there's potential logic doesn't mean it's going to come to pass, right? But the thing is, the situation in Venezuela and the drugs coming through Venezuela could have gotten worse. The potential is that our crime situation became harder to control and it got exponentially out of control, and we can't increase our law enforcement assets exponentially to respond to that. So it's a complex situation. I can't necessarily fault the smaller Caribbean or the more northern Caribbean islands for it, but they may have potentially run into the situation where they would have been right behind us with crime going out of control further in their country if someone didn't put a stop to it. The question is this the right way to put a stop to it? We have Faisal on the line. Good morning, caller, on here.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, Trinidad.
Morning.
Okay, so my take on this thing is that there is no confrontational issue between Trinidad and Venezuela. Never once I have heard the Prime Minister supporting the regime change, neither the invasion of Venezuela. However, Maduro continues to attack Trinidad and Tobago. I've never heard him utter any bad word or even attack President Trump or hashtag or any one of them. Yes, but he and his vice president continuously attacks Trinidad and Tobago. They did the similar thing to Brazil, to Colombia, to Guyana. Yes? So that is a narrative that they continue to have. So I'm wondering if they are gathering intelligence. Remember, they have alliances with China, it is alleged with Russia. So we don't know what the plan is. The Americans would have seen it fit because they would have the kind of intelligence that I and you don't have. None of us would have. So we are speculating. But what is clear is Trinidad and Tobago has never issued any threat or supported any threat of invasion to Venezuela. What we have done, we have benefited from the American exercise in the Southcom. And I can't see somebody where the country is riddled with crime and criminality. We have a drug problem, and you are getting mutual assistance from the United States of America by the way of they conducting their exercises. We are benefiting from it. Trinidad and Tobago, that is. Then why should we not, accommodate that kind of help? I remember Dr. Rowley and them signed an agreement sometime, I think it was last year.
Yes.
Giving the Americans access to our country for military exercises and purposes. So, I don't know that we should be vexed at all with the benefits we are getting. So people are just blowing hot air, but Trinidad and Tobago has never once issued in any form or fashion a threat with support of invasion to Venezuela. Take care, my brother. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Kuala. In fact, not only has the Prime Minister said she's not agreeing with regime change, she said directly, I believe, potentially more than one occasion, that Trinidad and Tobago will not support or be staging grounds for U.S. operations or U.S. logistical support operations, right? We're not going to be a part of anything to do with attacking Venezuela. This is where one could argue it might be semantics, one could argue it might be politics, but the Americans themselves have not said that they would attack Venezuela. They have said Maduro's days are numbered, and they have not clarified what that means. So this is where, not clarifying what it means, you set yourself up for the negative interpretation of your words. But they did say things to the effect, I can't remember, so I don't want to misquote the Americans. They did say things to the effect of they're not going to go in, which is very strange. They're not going to attack militarily Venezuela, but they're going to hit land targets of these narco-terrorism groups, which we assume to be in Venezuela because they're hitting ships coming away from Venezuela. And he's also saying Maduro's days are numbered. So it's a very inconsistent set of messaging from the American president and his administration. Doesn't help their case one bit. But our prime minister has been consistent with regards to that. I will say this, I do think the Venezuelans maybe were preempting the whole situation, trying to undermine our national position because of things like the SOFA agreement. But I think the point you're trying to make is correct. The exercises are not going to help the Americans attack Venezuela. What the Americans need is, if necessary, staging grounds, right? Because we're close to Venezuela. So I could see where there is operational, logistical, and maybe even, operational, logistical, let's keep it at that, benefits of having access to Trinidad and Tobago. But it seems as though they're staging from Puerto Rico. They're not staging from us. And they have enough assets, and Venezuela's military, by all accounts, and this is the effect of sanctions, are in enough of a state of disrepair where they have, or they should have enough assets where they could get a foothold in Venezuela just based on their air assault assets staging out of America and Puerto Rico and marine assets. It's doable. Probably not something that any good general with their salt would want to try to do unless it was necessary. But our prime minister said, we're not open for that kind of business. The exercise themselves does not help any American invasion. It helps us be prepared to defend ourselves. It's not like we have a lot of stuff we could tell them about Venezuela is going to make a big difference. They know more about Venezuelans military than what we know. Clarkson, me on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, morning, Sean.
Morning.
You know, throughout the years I've been living in this country, and not one prime minister had ever caused America to come down here in this large number with all these vessels, with all these warships. Not one. How all of a sudden they are here today? But I want to cut course. I want to let you know, did you watch the story with Anna Roberts this week? I guess some of them watched that.
You mean last week?
I think this week it was. I think that's a very interesting story. A very interesting story that you should watch about Anna Roberts, the sports minister. And this girl, Miss Malchan, who has been hiding out in Miami, you know, for a long time. Just imagine with this same government was this woman to be hiding out in Miami. And you know, I find it strange, Sean. There's a lot of things going on with this government that you don't really speak of. For instance, we had things like members of the own party talk about human trafficking with this same government that is in power. And you know what? The people seems like they're complacent about all these things, what is going on with this government. And they just be quiet. A lot of people just be very quiet with these things that happening with this government. But of course the PNM, if this thing was happening today was about the PNM, the whole country would have been uproar. Today people are silent. very, very silent. Because in their mind, America become like a god. They will protect us. They will save us. You understand? They are the saviors. But I don't believe that. I know that America is here for their own opportunity, their own gains. And if people like you and many people who is educated cannot see that, well, then we are in total trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Well, I can't speak to the rest of the country. I will say this. I am approaching the current administration in a similar manner that I approached the PNM administration. I was not criticizing the PNM wall to wall throughout the shows when we first started on every little thing, right? I give my opinion. If I don't have an opinion to give on something, I'll refrain. Sometimes I want more information. With regards to Anna Roberts, I'll say this. Now, part of the reason why I haven't brought him up at all is he's kept quiet up until now, I believe, right? And that whole situation with St. Vincent, we spoke about that. With regards to Sport TT and that stuff, that hasn't reached me yet. I don't know if I necessarily want to speak about it because what you could say on something or what I could say on something is two different things. I have to be more responsible than the average individual. At least, well, potentially even if I'm in a private capacity, but at least when I am in front of the camera. Now, I will also say this. Most of the country weren't that vocal about the PNM. They weren't that vocal about the PNM even up until the elections. That's why people still thought, oh, this might be close. When in reality, it wasn't close at all. The elections was not close at all. Now, it was in hindsight disappointing to see the 4% dip in voter turnout. But the point is, the election was not close at all. There's no way to say that the election was close. But we thought in the media the election might be close because we didn't hear enough from the public to say they were done with the PNM. So to say that the public was lambasting the PNM, I don't know about that one. And in my personal life, off air, I get a lot of people talking because, look, I live in the Port of Spain area. A lot of people I know are in the Port of Spain area. Make that of what you will. Now, it's not that I'm speaking to PNM supporters, but hey, they don't have rose-colored glasses for the UNC, and they have complaints, and they've voiced it from the very beginning. But to some extent, that's anecdotal and perception, and if I go too far, then it almost comes as though I'm biased against. And in fact, one of the media houses, I have heard repeatedly, at least from some analysis of their editorialization of current events, that they're anti-government. So the thing is, this administration, you have people who are assumed to be blatant bad apples alongside people who you, at least in the past, not too distant past, perceived to be reasonable or upright individuals. And now what happens is those who have a strong opinion, their minds are made up. The rest of us, we're trying to figure out how exactly those things resolve themselves, the differences. Is it that the people who you had respect for in the not too distant, in even the recent past, is it that they are no longer worthy of respect? Or is it that the bad apples are limited in what they could do and limited in their influence? We don't know. We don't know. The thing is, when you had the Auto General situation, that was the most blatant and public situation that I've ever seen. Ever. And even I have not necessarily said repeatedly, oh, Carl Mabert has to go. Why is he still there? Why is he deputy political leader PNM? It was so egregious with that Auto General thing. But at the end of the day, at some point, if I just keep complaining about it, it will be more like a rant and biased against and hateful of than, oh, well, this is the practical thing. If the PNM want to keep him, at some point, I was like, you want to keep him, that's fine. If it bites you in the rear end later on down the line, that's a you problem. It's not a me problem, right? Because the situation hasn't been resolved. So I can't say that it's all hunky-dory, nothing to see here. I said that about the TPP with regards to AudioGate. Definitely, you could assume, with me at least, that applies in any ongoing situation left hanging, like the Auditor General situation, like the merit list situation, which will probably never get a resolution for that. And we'll wait to see if this government does anything similar to warrant that. Now, the previous caller mentioned something, and this goes in line with the comment that was sent. So if we could put up the comment now, I don't know. Right. President Trump faced a Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela military alliance and armed with modern sophisticated defense systems. And appears to be looking for a way out yesterday. No, that's not my read at all. First of all, the one piece of military hardware I know that was sent to Venezuela, manpads, shoulder-launched infrared homing missiles. This is not like Soviet Union, Afghanistan in the 80s, where technology was a lot different and those sorts of weapons could be a lot more effective. This is 2025, where high-altitude precision bombing is a thing, first of all. High-altitude precision bombing was not a thing back then. And two, between stealth technology, jamming technology, proven in 91, it's in many ways safer to be high altitude. In which case, the stuff that Russia recently sent to Venezuela potentially might be practically useless in most cases, depending, right? That's point number one. Point number two, Russia, China, Iran have almost zero capacity to project any sort of military power into the region. Yeah, they could send a couple planes. But on a practical level, no, they can't fight a war with America in the Western Hemisphere. China could potentially fight a war with America in China's sphere, physical sphere of influence, where they could support any military operation from bases in China, where they could supply military troops from distribution networks in China and from China. And from China to go halfway across the world, based on strategic analysis of multiple different scenarios and based on reports and analysis with regards to China's threat to Taiwan, the Formosa Strait, the South China Sea, the strategic analysis with regards to threats that they perceive with regards to India and Indonesia and so on and so on, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They don't have the capacity to project power to the Southern Caribbean. And here's the thing, Europe is probably doing this, saying, yes, Russia, send more stuff to Venezuela. Please do so. Please do so. Who knows? This could all be a potential bait where it's like, watch this. I'm going to bluff Putin into sending stuff to Venezuela. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm not even saying that's likely to be the truth. I'm saying that is a very small possibility. So Venezuela, from the onset, always willing to negotiate. Yeah, they're willing to negotiate, but what is their negotiating position? What do they want of the negotiations? And more importantly, what are they willing to concede? Because if they were always willing to negotiate and were willing to make concessions to the Americans, sanctions won't exist. We need to realize something. Maduro is, I cannot sit here and say he is a legitimately elected, democratic elected president. So, and based on the last election, how that was handled, how he has retained power, how the military has successfully suppressed protests on the election, but not protests against Trinidad and Tobago, because, hey, that's fine. Those are sanctioned, apparently. Venezuela is under a dictatorship. Dictators tend to not be good faith actors when it comes to international community stuff. Chavez might have actually been much more of a responsible state leader, but Maduro, it's hard to go with that. It's hard for me to agree with anything that suggests that, because I have seen, the only things I have seen contradict that sentiment, don't support it. We have Move on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
You know, well, first of all, I have no intention of getting into this discussion, this Venezuela-America discussion. Because
Sure.
quite frankly, I think it's way above my pay grade. And I don't want to be like a lot of people who claim to know. I don't know. So I will leave that. But I have listened to Claxton Bay on a number of occasions, and I feel I have to say something to Mr. Claxton Bay. I hope he's listening. Mr. Claxton Bay, you know, and Sean, I've told you this. Trinidad and Tobago is in a dire crisis. We are in a political crisis. We are in a social crisis. We are in a crisis where crime is concerned, criminality crisis. Okay, every one of our institutions is operating way below par. We have a justice system. I don't understand how anyone in the legal fraternity doesn't feel ashamed every day. When I read the newspapers on a regular basis and see that this case came up, it might be wounding, it might be murder, it might be robbery, fraud, and it's something that happened 15 years ago, 20 years ago, sometimes a simple wounding with intent. 15 years ago, and it's now coming. I don't understand how these people, these prominent people are not ashamed. This is a country of 1.4 million people, a Mickey Mouse country. How have our institutions become that bogged down, that burdened with bureaucracy? How no one, these are the questions when people call. I listen to all these people calling and giving their opinion about the American team. They want to know what they feel and know what is in Trump's mind. Quite frankly, I think we have so much problems here. Those are the things we should be concentrating on, but no, we like to talk about things far apart. It is absolute craziness, and I want to go back to what I've told you before, Sean. Those first critical 25 to 30 years is when the die was cast. You listen to Mr. Claxton Bay and you would think that the opposition, no, not the opposition, no, UNC, let me be clear. You would think that the UNC has been in office for so long. The UNC was only formed in 1998. The PNM has been in existence since 1956. Why, when we have discussions, we keep overlooking that you and all have said at times, well, I can't really agree that crime is worse when the PNM is in office because they have been there longest. It was shown that is actually admitting it also. I mean, there's a kind of twisted logic there. Okay? Those first 25 years, when did corruption become commonplace in Trinidad and Tobago? During those first 25 years, when did nepotism, dysfunction? That is when it started. That's when it started. That was the root of our issue. And you listen to people like Claxton Bay, you would think it started after the NAR, or it started when Pandey came in office. I keep telling people, why are you all so dishonest? The PNM has held office for 53, possibly 53 years. The UNC has only been in office for about 12 and a half years because the NAR was fight, and the NAR was an amalgamation. I don't understand how when we are having discussions, we don't make these. This is genuine facts that cannot be ignored. And when we are having discussions, we always ignore it. You're talking about a party that has been in office for like 12 and a half years. Why you like to criticize them in such a way as if they have been there all the time? Why are you doing that? The level of crime and corruption in this country didn't start when the UNC came into office. And I find people continue to be dishonest. People listen to Claxton Bay, you would think that all our problems only came in place when the opposition is. People are quiet now, and they were attacking the PNM. Well, what nonsense? What nonsense? People were very silent on the PNM, and as you said, I am always surprised that they turned against them so much because I was hearing certain things, but I couldn't be sure. You know, so we are not honest in this country. I keep telling that, Sean, we are not honest. We are not the honest people. And you know who are the most dishonest people? The educated elite. The educated elite that stayed so silent about noise pollution. And all of a sudden, as Kamala makes that statement, people coming out of the woodwork now to defend culture. What culture? And before I leave, let me ask you, just repair my ignorance. how exactly did Kamala attack culture? Because Mr. San Fernando said it, and you said that you kind of agree with it. So explain that to me, please. You could explain off here. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Well, the problem is there were more, in my opinion, with regards to noise pollution, there were more pressing issues than FETs in the Brian Lara Cricket Academy. First of all, other venues are closer to residential areas and are potentially bigger nuisances, but the thing targeted was Brian Lara Cricket Academy. Second, FETs potentially, well, let me not say that. Second, yes, you have FETs, but loud music in cars, music trucks blasting their sound systems while transitioning to the areas where they're supposed to be operating and have their license or permission for, and bars and even supermarkets that want to be pseudo bars blasting loud music. Those are the things to me where seemingly things are completely out of control, right? Now I get it with FETs, the thing is it's hard to voice a complaint because by the time it's processed, the FET is already over. But the flip side is at least it's a cutoff point. And in a lot of cases, the FETs are not gonna be literally the bar next to your house. Now, she did say that those are next, but I did find as a starting point, the Brian Lara Cricket Academy was quite weak. And also, the thing is, and somebody did bring up the point that I think Manning also tried to do this, or did it. But the problem is, sporting events do not make money only off of sporting facilities do not make money only off of sporting events. So American football stadiums and American basketball arenas, they regularly have events. You need off-season income, and even within the season, they might have some events. Depending on the schedule, right? They might have some events. Now, part of the question is, why go after the Cricket Academy? So I can't fault San Fernando for saying what he said, because it seemed like it was a low-hanging fruit, not solving the problem, because to me it comes back down to what are the laws? Yes, I know nuisance laws, but obviously it's not enough unless you want to go to civil court. Something's not working. And if it's the case where the police and the EMA are not doing their job, why, if the Prime Minister has somewhere to start with that? And then, of course, we spoke about it on Friday with regards to the EMA. The EMA, with regards to FETs, right? You can't do this for bars that are just operating willy-nilly. You can't do this for music trucks that are operating willy-nilly. But with regards to FETs, the EMA should have more than enough people with sound measures to ensure that the approved decibel levels for that stadium is what it is whenever there's an event there. Just like how there are police deployed, just like how there are fire service officers deployed. And if they are deployed, and I didn't know, and Ashraf didn't know, fair enough, but it seems as though they're not deployed in part because they don't have enough resources, so that's also something that the Prime Minister could have done. So there's more I want to say, because I do think it's not totally unfair to... You didn't disparage Mr. Clarkson Bay, but there's a point indirectly that he makes. It's not necessarily a point that he speaks to, but we have Faisal back, so I'll take the call and then I'll continue what I was just saying. Caller, good morning.
Sean, good morning again. And I want to say the reason I am thinking that the Prime Minister would have started with the Brian Lara Academy is because the carnival season is upon us. And this is the starting point. Remember, the Brian Lara Stadium doesn't have FET right throughout the year. So she would have used this at the starting point. Most of the stadiums in the States, they are privately or partially owned by football clubs and what have you. Taxpayers pay to maintain the stadiums in Trinidad and Tobago. When they leave there, the place, it costs a whole set of money to get it back in order. And the promoters go away with their bag of money. I have no problem with that. That's their investment, they go with, but we have to protect the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the responsibility of the government. And there's absolutely nothing wrong, because when there is that threat in the Brian Lara Stadium, you can hear that music as far as Pinal, you know, Sean. Yes?
Yeah.
The horror of traffic jams and what have you in and around San Fernando is crazy. It is crazy. So, yes, we have to start it because it's carnival season and it's the opportune time that would kind of get these people into gear to prepare for next year, put the house in order, get it going.
Yes, there's the obvious follow-up question. So if all of these venues are blocked for vets, for carnival vets, where are vets of that size supposed to go?
Sean, promoters have a responsibility.
No, regardless, because we're banning them, where are they going to go? Because San Fernando says Skinner Park is open, and that would just make the problem worse. Where are they going to go?
I think there would be rules and regulations governing it. And I think that is one of the major things that is hampering it. Rules and regulations are not being enforced. The Prime Minister could only act upon what is owned by the state and is managed by you.
Right, but hold on. If the situation is rules and regulations not being enforced, why is the solution to just ban? Why not put things in place to enforce the rules and regulations? Because
I remember Hilton used to have a big pit where Crown Plaza used to be. Sparrow Hideaway, all these places have a lot of private venues. Yes? But
Hilton isn't a private venue.
Saw a way to make more returns for their money. And there's nothing wrong with other things. That's what you want.
But Caller, Hilton isn't a private venue. It's owned by the government. And would you rather... Hilton isn't a private venue. It's owned by the government. If the promoters are irresponsible with something which is physically more robust than Hilton, like the stadium, do we really want that activity in Hilton?
Sean, we are looking at the location of the venues. We are looking at the
Hilton is in a Hilton is sandwiched by 2 residential areas.
Yes, but what I am saying to you, the people in San Fernando has been complaining, and the government has to act. We just can't ignore the pleas of the citizenry.
I understand that, but again, I just want to ask: are you saying that fets like this should not happen?
Similarly, if the people in Port of Spain, if it's affecting them, they have a right to protest as well.
Okay, but what is the alternative?
Fortunately or unfortunately, the people in San Fernando has been lobbying this for a while. This didn't pop up overnight, you know.
Well, this is funny because you are disagreeing with Mr. San Fernando, who, ironically, lives in San Fernando.
But I don't know that, but I can tell you, I'm hearing music quite in Pinal.
Are you hearing, well, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that. Are you hearing it from that venue?
That's the point.
Notice.
And Mr. San Fernando.
Yeah, but are you sure you're hearing the music from the Cricket Academy or from another venue?
Of course. And Mr. San Fernando, he has a right to his opinion. And so do I. Yes, it's not that I'm contending that his opinion is wrong. He has a right to that. But I am sharing with you what are my concerns, what is a great number of the citizenry concerned. And so I would leave that there, let the government deal with that, let's see how best they can come to an amicable resolution. But the other thing I want to remind you of, the opposition leader in Venezuela, as far as I'm aware, is in exile or is in hiding. I'm not certain which one. But isn't that person a Nobel Prize winner?
You see, the flip side is, yes, she is, but the Nobel Peace Prize...
What does the Nobel Prize seem to suggest or represent?
Well, here's the thing. Before this situation, I would have said the Nobel Peace Prize arguably is an international political tool, as opposed to the Nobel Prize for scientific achievement. So that does not necessarily say that Ms. Machado is deserving or undeserving of praise or what have you. But it has in the past been considered an international political tool.
But there is a body, a well-respected body in the past that would have made that decision.
I would not, for those who understand the history, or not, because I wouldn't say I understand the history, but generally speaking, I don't think you could say that's a well-respected body that will always get it right.
Then that's conjecture, because a lot of people feel the way I do. You know, again, we are entitled to our opinion. But what I can tell you, it is respected worldwide. It is accepted worldwide. If it was so bad, people would have refused it. Look what took place in the Miss Universe thing where all the contestants walked out. So, you know, I'm a little bit confused. Take care, my brother.
Thank you, caller. So it was the Nobel, okay, case in point, Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Al Gore for his activism of climate change, even though it's a prize for being a peacemaker. I'm trying to find all of them. Some people will point to the fact that Mahatma Gandhi never got the Nobel Peace Prize. It's too much to get into the... There was stuff with Kissinger, and it's a political tool. It's an international political tool. To what extent is it respected? Is Miss Universe as a pageant that well respected? I mean, there's so many international pageants, right? Is that the pageant because it says universe, it's higher than world? I mean, there were individuals that got the Peace Prize for their efforts to create peace in the Middle East. We never really saw peace in the Middle East. Now, just look at the map. If you could hear music from the Brian Lara Cricket Academy in Penal, I am very impressed because I can't hear music from the stadium where I live, and I live much closer to the stadium than Penal is to the Brian Lara Cricket Academy, I believe. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is just based on my limited knowledge of physics and sound engineering on what outdoor venues will do to sound. I'm not sure how, I don't know if I could agree with a statement like that without more evidence. That's just too far of an open air distance. I mean, I don't even know if we have a sound system powerful enough to make that happen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't hear carnival activities where I live. And Carnival is 10 minutes away in Port of Spain from where I live. So, again, like I said, Mr. San Fernando is the one that made the comment that you're disagreeing with, but then you want to claim that people in San Fernando. One of the things that we discussed with Ashraf is the perception of noise pollution. You hearing something, first of all, it might not be from Brian Lara Cricket Academy. It could be music from a bar in between there and where you are. That's point number one. Point number two, a bar next to you where you can't sleep at all, guaranteed, because it's blasting loud music, and a fete that you could hear the music in the background is not quite the same thing. Particularly when the bar is not limited to whenever the fete is and the carnival season. The bar is every week, every month, every year. So again, Now, where do we send these FETs? Because I hate to say this, and I've said this before and you didn't like it, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. Fetting, loud music, it's cultural. Now, the rebuttal that if you wanted to say, Mr. San Fernando, perhaps maybe part of the culture should be allowed to be diminished or die. The irresponsible, excessive parts needs to be restrained and reined in. Sure, I could potentially agree with that, right? Depending on the details and how it works out and so on and so on. But at the end of the day, it's cultural and part of the economy. Let's not forget that. So if we banned it, if the solution is banning, then the problem, you don't ban something because the problem is, well, the management of the situation is wrong. No, you ban it because it cannot be managed. If you're saying it cannot be managed, fine. But you did say that we weren't enforcing rules and regulations. Not that we couldn't. Therefore, banning is taking a sledgehammer to a problem that just, needs a screwdriver. If you try to sledgehammer the screw in, it's not going to work. And again, why the Cricket Academy? You might say, oh, well, the government controls it, whatever, whatever. Listen, you could make whatever laws you want to make. Again, Manning did try this as well. But then there's also the fact that you are saying, look what the FETs do to the facilities. And I would say, yes, but then that's a question of, did the facilities come to the correct agreement with the FET promoters so that the FET promoters will have reasonable liability for how the facility is treated? Or did they not? Did they come to a responsible agreement with the FET promoters to promote their FETs? Or did they not? That's a different problem. That requires a different solution. Because if you want to say ban the FETs and no FETs, fine. I don't know if the majority of the population are going to support you. So then what's going to happen is the people who protest to ban the FETs are going to be drowned out by the people who protest for the FETs. And instead of solving noise pollution, you're going to be at an impasse. The government is going to say, fine, we're just going to do nothing. And there is part of the problem. If you go down the wrong path to the potential wrong solution, if it doesn't work, which it most likely won't, because there will be something, the outcome is not going to be what you expect, right? However it unfolds, you will probably end up with a situation where your concerns are not met because all of the political capital was spent pursuing an option that wasn't feasible in the first place. It's not as though they're going to say, oh, we were wrong, let's adjust. No, because the inertia is going to set in and they're going to say, let's not even touch it because too many people now have decided to counter-protest the whole thing. And you're going to get what you get. Because unfortunately, noise pollution is cultural. And you're not going to just ban that out of existence. And to some extent, the government will blink if the narrative of them being anti-whatever demographic continues. But there are more than enough fetters and rum drinkers and party goers in South, where it doesn't have to be a North Trinidad demographic. This is the Cricket Academy after all. This is down in South. So, all right, we gotta wrap up. Okay, let's take the comment. All right, I'll just say this. Cut to the chase and you tell me what military hardware Venezuela has. I'm not even gonna bother. Just you tell me. You tell me what military hardware that Russia, who's currently trying to keep up with war material production for their own needs, and China, who's currently trying to utilize as much war material production for their own military buildup with any potential operation against Taiwan. Tell me, what did they send over that's modern? Do I hold it in very high esteem? No, in this case, it's not all holding it in very high esteem. It's understanding capabilities, understanding logistics, understanding strategic analysis, following military, technical history and capabilities over the course of my, I don't know, from the time I was 8. And also understanding that given the fact that Ukraine could hold down Russia in the manner that they did, and the style of operations that we see in the Ukraine war, and then you translate that as to what can be sent to Venezuela, and the fact that it's not going to be the same battlefield, not going to be the same battle space, and it's not going to be the same type of enemy that Ukraine is, they have lost every war since Vietnam. No, since Vietnam. What about 91 Gulf War? They won that war. What about the invasion of Iraq? They conquered Saddam Hussein's Iraq. What about Afghanistan? They beat the Taliban. In the war, and this is what people seemingly don't understand, they're successful at war. But because of how it's perceived, what war is perceived, no, an occupation, that's after the war. And more importantly, one of the reasons why America has not been able to pacify a hostile population during an occupation is because they have this unfortunate, inconvenient thing called the Uniform Code of Military Justice that says that they can't just kill people willy-nilly. Granted, we're not seeing that play out right now in the Southern Caribbean, but generally speaking, that whole democracy and human rights stuff causes them to, have to leave loopholes open for certain bad faith actors to exploit and operate in a manner that the Americans themselves don't conduct war. But that's insurgencies. The insurgency in Iraq did not save Saddam Hussein. The insurgency, whatever attempted guerrilla warfare in Venezuela, is not going to save Maduro. It could cause attrition to an occupying army, but it cannot stop that occupying army from doing whatever it wants to do if there's specific objectives to be had. Occupying the whole country is not a specific objective, right? Vietnam is, again, war has evolved. What we have seen in Russia-Ukraine would not have happened back in 2014. What happened in Vietnam between the 1960s to the late 70s probably would not happen if those two nations, for whatever reason, decided to go to war in the same geographic space. It's not the same. Technology is advanced. We have color TVs now. We have the internet now. That's civilian life. Military life is not stagnant. And if you want to go with stagnant military principles, logistics matter more than anything else. Russia can't keep Venezuela supplied if it did become into a shooting war. And then there's also the fact that how did a much better equipped Iraqi military fared twice against the Americans? Because a lot of the technology that Venezuela has that are holdovers, that are pre-existing, would be quite old. And potentially no better, generally speaking, than the stuff that you saw in the carrier system in 91 in Desert Storm. I think we have another comment. Let's get that and then be out. Again, that's fair. But there's also, I didn't say that Brand Critical economy is not a problem. I said if you go after the wrong solution, you might end up with no solution. Because there's already one, my first caller on the matter, who lives in San Fernando. What was his point? It was one of disagreement. Lives in San Fernando. He's from San Fernando. Right? Now, with regards to the complaints on the Citizens Against Noise Pollution, unless I get the specifics, I can't assess it. But as we spoke to Ashraf, not all noise complaints are the same. Right? Newest complaints about the Brand Critical economy, is that with regards to the crowds? Is that with regards to the loud music? And again, wouldn't the solution be more to manage the volume of the music, determine what's a reasonable volume, and if there are still complaints, then we do have to ask, why is there complaints? Is there anything we could do about it? Are the complaints unreasonable? Because, like I said, this is the reality. You don't have to like it for it to be reality. All this noise pollution nonsense is ingrained in the culture. You're not just going to take a heavy hand and ban it away and it's going to work in the long run, because Mr. Manning tried out with the stadium. I don't know if it could have been for all Unicode facilities back then as well. Didn't seem to work out in the long run then, right? Did it change anything about noise pollution? No. One of the things that Ashraf said last week is he hopes that the conversation, now the deeper conversation, could be had. The conversation about not the what venue has noise pollution, but rather the conversation about what's wrong with the laws governing noise pollution, what's wrong with the enforcement agencies and operational practices and regulations and procedures with regards to dealing with specific instances of noise pollution and dealing with it in a timely manner. This does not address that. This does not address that at all. And it seems as though the Prime Minister is looking to try to take the ban hammer to things, or we're going to, no more FETs in here. And then what? No more, no, how are you going to, I don't know how you're going to enforce that for bars and music trucks and maxis and taxis and motor vehicle loud music, right? I don't know how you're going to ban that. And maybe those things are coming down the pipe, but this is not the start. With regards to an actual practical measure, this is not the start I think most people think it is. Because if this is messed up, the conversation on noise pollution is going to be stunted and is going to be set back. I don't know how many years, but it might take another 5 to 10 years for another serious consideration at dealing with the problem if this is not handled properly. And banning FETs in Brian Lara Cricket Academy is the least effective option. The only thing more ineffective than it would be to ban FETs in the stadium in Tobago that's in the middle of nowhere. That has like a mountain between it and the next village. Right? I mean, at the very least, I could kind of understand the stadium and the savannah more. So like I said, part of the issue is, oh, well, we're still going to have stuff in the savannah. People who live near the savannah. Belmont is not right next to the savannah. Not just right next to the savannah, but the grandstand is not too far from where Belmont is. She didn't ban it everywhere. She just banned it there. Doesn't that seem weird? If noise pollution in the nation was the issue, or is it literally just noise pollution around Brian Lara Cricket Academy? And now, there's the other thing. If Brian Lara Cricket Academy can't pay its bills, why should the taxpayers foot the bill? I don't know, maybe trying to make as much things as self-sufficient with the fact that we don't have money to pay for all of our needs right now should be a priority. So like I said, this by itself is not going to solve noise pollution. She might solve it in the next step. Depends on what the next step is. But I suspect she's going to try to like just ban things and not actually deal with the enforcement side, which means that some of the things she won't be able to effectively ban, like music trucks. She has to deal with the enforcement side of it. I'm over time. Thanks to the commenters. I didn't even finish the stuff with the Americans. There's more criticisms from the PNM, and I understand it, generally speaking, on the surface level, but it all comes back down to, does our defense force have a purpose or not? And here's the joke on the matter. As much as I'm like, hey, you know, this could be useful, these exercises, I don't think our defense force, for the most part outside the Coast Guard, has a true purpose. So the practical benefits of the military exercises, I don't know. They could help us get there. It all depends on how serious we are about it. Doesn't seem that we are very serious when senior defense force officers have no clue what's going on, at least the day before or the day of the exercise start point. So we'll wait and see how that turns out, and we'll continue conversations tomorrow. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. I'll repeat it again. Stay safe as much as possible. Do not leave your car. The gentleman was lucky that just his car was stolen. You get into any minor altercation at night in your vehicle, you give a hard assessment on if it's necessary for you to leave your car in that moment. Because anything like that could be a setup to get your car or potentially to do more harm to you. Never forget that. Never forget that. Even in States, I saw something like that. No time to go into it. It's nice to be nice. Try and be nice to people you see. And if you see anybody in distress, try to help them out. Don't just turn a blind eye because you don't want to be involved. At this point, we do need to try and help out each other, probably more. Otherwise, we will just be victims to the predators that are criminals, like how a lone wildebeest will be the victim to a pack of lions when they're on their own. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for being with us once again here on WESN. Well, with the talk of war and in some cases harsh words being thrown around by leaders in the region, we thought we'd get a perspective on that from someone who was contributed significantly to the public